Okay, stacks. I have this little image here, which if you were at any other university, almost any other university, would be ubiquitous, right? This is real common in commissaries, in mess halls, in cafeterias, at buffets, right? And there's almost no resolution image that I have, shows you how it works, right? It's a spring-loaded plate dispenser. And the idea is that you can put plates on top and the springs will allow them to go down. The weight will cause the springs to extend, and you pick one off the top and it'll kick it up a little bit. And you can store a bunch of plates in it, but they're not on the counter, so they won't get knocked over. They're not a danger to fall, any of that stuff. However, there is a downside. If you put plates on top and you hear a crack and you think that plate broke, how do you get to that plate? Well, you have to take all of these plates off. You can't just access that bottom plate. You have to take all of those other plates off to get to it. And that, honestly, is the inspiration for the name of the stack. This is not like a cute analogy I came up with. At the time, they had this structure where you'd put things in it and take them off, and they needed a name for it. And they went to the cafeteria and they saw the plate stacker and they said, hey, we just call it a stack. So they did. And stacks are last in, first out data structures that can store objects of an arbitrary type. And again, this might be different depending on the implementation, but what we're talking about for now is just an arbitrary type. And all content of the stack is accessed from the same end, right? Last in, first out. The last thing that you put in the stack is the first thing that's going to come out. You can never see inside of the stack. Saying, hey, give me the fifth thing in the stack, it doesn't make sense. Hey, give me the thing at index 27 of the stack, that doesn't make sense. And this is one of the oldest abstract data types. It has been implemented at a low level in computer languages and operating systems for forever. Turing suggested the idea of this thing in 1946, but it's been used in computer architecture since the mid-1950s. And what that means is this is back probably in the era of EDVAC, which is the second major computer that was general purpose in the United States. The Nazis had computers back in the 40s that were experimental machines, almost considered Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons. There's a whole history there, but Alan Turing worked with Colossus, and they had a few versions of Colossus in the UK. Harvard had the Mark I, Mark II, and I think the Mark III that Grace Hopper worked on during the war. So, ENIAC was 1951, EDVAC was in the mid-50s. These are not necessarily the first computers, but these are the first kind of fully realized systems that are fully structured and fully expressed. And before, they're all custom. Every computer I named was a custom thing. It was put together by the people using it, using the parts that they had. It wasn't until UNIVAC in 1960 or 1961 that they released the 1101 that you had the first, air quotes, mass-produced computer. Now, these things were still the size of a room, but they were something that if you had a spare couple $1,000,000 laying around, you could buy a computer. So stacks predate that. That gives you an idea of how old these things are. And the key thing is that the terminology hasn't changed since that time. So if I grabbed Marvin Minsky or Simon Newell, or Alan Turing had passed by 1960, John von Neumann, if I teleported them to right now and put them in my computer chair right now, my office chair, they would have no idea what my mouse is or my keyboard. They might recognize the keyboard a little bit, or the monitor, or the computer itself. They'd have no idea what these things were because they're so different than the technology they worked on. But if I said, just trust me, people can hear you, talk into this microphone right here, tap, 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 and tell them about stacks, they'd go, stacks? Oh, that's easy. And the terminology would be almost identical. There'd be some weird edge conditions that would be a little different, but for the most part, they'd be the same. And so step one, because we're talking about that plate stacker analogy, they take a vertical orientation like this, where the oldest thing, the first thing that you put on is on the bottom of the stack, and the most recently added thing is on the top of the stack. Saying the first thing in the stack or the last thing in the stack doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Saying the third thing in the stack doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe you can say, what was the first thing that you put on the stack? Right? That might make some sense because now you're dealing with time, not location. But positional things with the stack, the only things that make sense are top and bottom. That's it. Similarly, our interface hasn't changed very much. Every stack that you're going to see will have a push and a pop. There's no way around it. Okay, push puts a new object on the top of the stack. Pop tries to take an object off the top of the stack, assuming there's something in the stack. Talking about put, talking about append, talking about add. Oh, I'm going to add to the stack. That does not make sense. I'm going to push onto the stack. I'm going to pop off of the stack. These are the only terms that make sense, and you will confuse people if you say anything else. Additionally, there are some other methods that are pretty common. Peek or top, attempt to remove, attempt to access, not remove, attempt to just look at what's on the top of the stack. Len will get the number of elements in the stack, and is empty will return true if there are no elements in the stack, false otherwise. And errors occur if we try to use pop, peek, or top, and there's nothing in the stack. Okay. Some things of note. This is usually an either or proposition. If we have peek, we don't have top. If we have top, we don't have peek. Peek comes first. Why? Because I like it more. I think that the alliteration of push, pop, and peek is nice. I get that pop and top rhyme. That's not lost on me. I like peek better. If you disagree with me, I encourage you to get your master's degree and then pursue your PhD and get a job teaching computer science. And then you can influence the future the way I am currently. But I like peek more, so I'm putting it first. Additionally, all of these kind of break the paradigm a little bit, right? Peek lets you look inside the stack, technically, but it's so easy to do. We could simulate this without ever needing this, right? We could pop, and then we could do what we need to, and then we could push the element back on, and it would be like we peeked. So it's not that big a deal. Len, we could just store data in a variable that is the number of elements in our stack, right? Every time we push, we would also add one to that variable. Every time we pop, we'd subtract one. Not that big a deal. Is empty, similar concept. So these all kind of break the paradigm of not being able to see inside the stack, but it's such a trivial thing to kind of backdoor some solutions that it doesn't really matter that much. So you know, these are, in my experience, in order of likelihood to see. So this is most likely. Most of the time, if an object's going to have a peek or a top, or a len or an is empty, it will have a peek or a top, right? Is empty is the least likely to be implemented. But at this point, most modern programming languages have all 5 of these methods. You'll start to run into problems when you start to go back in time to older languages or go down to lower languages like C++ or C, things like that. But even in assembler, you will have push and pop. So we can do an example of this just to show how this works. And this is pretty straightforward, right? We can say, okay, we're going to create a stack and call it S, and that'll be this line over here. And then we just go through the process. We push, we put 10 on top. We push, we put 20 on top. We print the len, and we're going to print 2. Very punk rock. It's got a mohawk. That's awesome. We push again. We put 30 on top. Now we're going to pop, right? We're going to pop first and then print whatever we pop. So we pop and we take 30 off the top and we return that. and then we print what we return. So we go 30, and then we do that again, and we pop 20 off the top, and we do 20, and then we get top. Well, that's 10, right? 10's there. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to alter it, but we print it. Is it empty? False. And now we pop. Cool. And we're going to go and we'll take 10 off and we'll print 10. Is it empty now? You bet your butt. True. Now we call top. And I wish I had the sound effect from Meadow Veer. Right? We got an error. Depending, excuse me. Depending on our implementation, this could be an exception. This could print something out. It could crash the system, whatever. Let's assume that whatever we do, we fail gracefully and we keep going. Now we're going to push and we push thing on and we go for it and we keep moving. So this is the behavior. This is how it works, right? Notice we haven't talked about how it works behind the scenes yet.